Good morning and welcome to the Wichita City Council meeting. I'm Laura Gale Locke with City Communications. Today is Tuesday, December 8th, 2015. Well, we wanted to remind you that there will be a community forum for the Wichita Police Chief Search. That's coming up on Monday, December 14th. It'll be held at Century 2's Convention Hall from 6 to 8:30 p.m. It's your chance to hear from the two finalists for the Wichita Police Chief position. Now, you can submit your questions for the finalists in advance, and we encourage you to do so. You can do that through wichita.gov and the Activate Wichita website, which is activate-wichita.com. And now here's a look at what's coming up on today's City Council agenda. The Council will be asked to adopt the Community Investments Plan 2015 through 2035. The Council will consider water and sewer rate increases, and the Council will be asked to approve the preliminary planning estimates for the 2016-2017 Third Program Year Action Plan. For the latest City of Wichita news, we encourage you to visit us again on wichita.gov. Watch City 7 on Cox Cable Channel 7. You can also check out our YouTube channel under City of Wichita, and of course follow us on Facebook and Twitter. With that, I will turn things over to Mayor Longwell and the Council. Good morning, Council.
Good morning, Laura Gale, and good morning to all of those that are here with us and those watching us on whatever form of media you have chosen. We had a wonderful event last Thursday night with the mayor's Christmas tree lighting, and Santa Claus told me that I was still on the nice list. I don't know if he's skipped a step in his old age, but I figure I only have about 3 more weeks to be nice, and this year's paying off. So it's looking pretty promising, Robert.
He's not Santa Claus, that's for sure.
Well, we will call the meeting to order, and with us this morning we have Pastor Justin Lefto from Pleasant Valley United Methodist Church, I think, somewhere. Pastor? No?
No, it's not Pete Francis.
We have no pastor for us this morning.
He may be downstairs.
We have volunteers that want to do a quick invocation.
That's how to say grace.
A moment of silence.
You know, that certainly would be appropriate this morning. Why don't we start this meeting with a brief moment of silence in recognition of all of those that have gone through so much turmoil over this last few weeks, and think of all of the families that need our thoughts and prayers this morning. So just join me in a moment of silence, please, this morning. Thank you, Councilmember Miller. You are always quick to provide some of the best suggestions. That's why you're my favorite.
This morning.
If you would join with me, please. We are going to have the Pledge of Allegiance and welcome anyone that would like to join us. Please stand. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We have the minutes of December 1st, 2015. Are there any changes or corrections that need to be made to those minutes? If not, I would move that we approve the regular meeting minutes of December 1st, 2015.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Consent agenda items 1 through 12.
Council, are there any consent agenda items that need to be pulled for further discussion? Seeing none, I would move that we approve consent agenda items 1 through 12.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
DER 2015-1, Community Investments Plan 2015 to 2035.
And Mr. Dale Miller, that's going to share all of his wisdom this morning.
Dale Miller, planning staff. Good morning, council.
You've heard this a couple of times before, so I think I'll be very brief, but one of the first things that I wanted to do was thank everyone, particularly the 18-member steering committee that spent so much time working on the plan, and all the folks that participated in the meetings and surveys and so forth that went into making up the plan. We thank them for their participation. Planners like to think that long-range planning activity is a two-phased process, that there is a product, which is the plan that you're considering today, the hard copy, but as part of the process, there's also an education phase where people who maybe don't have time to think about the way cities work or why they work the way they do, when they participate in an event like a comprehensive plan update, those complexities are brought home and they have a chance to think about that, and we appreciate their involvement. So having said that, then I'll give a recap with, on August 20th, 2015, the Planning Commission adopted the first version of the plan. On November 4th, the Board of County Commissioners considered the plan and returned the plan to the Planning Commission. They asked the Planning Commission to consider some revisions to the original version. On November 10th, the City Council considered the plan and voted to return the plan to the MAPC with the recommendation that the plan remain unchanged. On November 19th, 2015, the Planning Commission considered the recommendations of the two governing bodies and the Advanced Plans Subcommittee, and by a vote of 10 to 3, agreed to 8 modifications to the original plan. In general, there were phrases that were added to statements or strategies, such as protecting individual property rights, a statement of fact about how the 1-cent sales tax is calculated and distributed, discussions about what priorities there should be for capital improvements, and in the end, the Planning Commission adopted one that recognized that the city and the county have different visions for transportation expenditures, and so both of those are accounted for in the plan. They deleted the word public from a strategy that had to do with the transit system. They deleted the word premier from a strategy that dealt with arts and culture and recreation. And in the end, they recommended approval with those 8 modifications. And so that's what is being proposed for your consideration today, and we're asking you to adopt the plan as adopted by the Planning Commission on November 19th. And with that, I try and answer questions.
Questions for Mr. Miller before we go out for public comment? As you said, we've heard it so many times. I think we're finally understanding it. We will ask if there's anyone in the public that would like to address the council on this agenda item. Please come to the podium. Even Gary Schmidt doesn't want to give us his wisdom this morning. Good morning, Gary. Good morning. We will bring the discussion back to the bench. Any further discussion? Yes, Pete.
Thank you. So again, this thanks to all the hard work that went into the original 2 years of work and then the most recent 2 weeks of work. So appreciate it, Dale and the group and the planning committee. But again, this is it's kind of a long-range guiding document. It's not, as been said, it's not the Bible. It's not, but it is a guiding document for planning decisions, things like that. Is that correct, Dale?
Yes, they are only policy positions. There is no requirement that you follow the policy positions by any state statutes.
As the world changes, such as the school district deciding to put a high school somewhere, or even natural disasters that might take out this or that. I mean, it's a document that's referenced, but both the city and all the little cities, the other cities in the county and the county are flexible to do what they need to do.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mayor. Did you have?
I did. I saw Cindy Miles walk in. I want to thank her for her leadership on this. She's taken this all the way through every step of the way, and that reminds me, she's a citizen in the community who likes to volunteer her time and do things in the community, as well as all the people that were involved in this plan. It was citizen-driven. It was what the citizens wanted. It's the citizens' view of the future of the city of Wichita, and so I think the citizens who participated need to be thanked more than we probably can. Thank you. So that being said, I'll support adopting today.
Councilmember Brian Fry, who sit in on all of these sessions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to start off with one of my favorite quotes, and it's from the architect of the St. Louis World's Fair. His name's Daniel Burnham. He says, "Make no little plans. They have no magic to stir men's blood." I would like to thank the staff, the volunteers, and the elected officials who helped create this document. During this process, we heard a lot of great discussion, disagreements, great ideas, and finally consensus. This is not a city plan, it's not a county plan, it's a community plan. And this document is going to help guide us, just like Councilmember Meitzner said, as we continue to build this city into the strongest economic driver in Kansas, and what I feel is the next great American hometown. So, thanks again for all your work that people did on this.
Thank you, Councilmember Fry. Well said, too. Anyone else? And I do appreciate you recognizing that this is a community plan. The only thing I will add to that is I appreciate the folks that sit on MAPC that worked incredibly diligent to come up with a plan that would be kind of a compromise that would fit both Wichita community's needs along with what they heard from our friends at Sedgwick County, and I think they came up with a very good compromise that fits, and I think we're ready to move this forward at this point. I would move that we approve the Community Investment Plan of 2015-2035 dated November 19th as the new Wichita-Sedgwick County Comprehensive Plan, including those neighborhood and area plans itemized on Attachment C to the resolution of the Wichita City County Metropolitan Area Planning Commission dated November 19th, placed on the ordinance on first reading, authorize the necessary signatures, and instruct the city clerk to publish the ordinance after approval on the second reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item.
Water and sewer rate increases.
Just recognize that Del Miller set the stage for today's agenda items. We would ask that this one go as smoothly and quickly.
Oh.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the council. Alan King, Director of Public Works and Utilities. I'm here to talk to you today about the water and sewer rates. It's been a long discussion this year. It began with our cost of service analysis update earlier this year, and we also brought the Utility Advisory Committee in on the discussion to look at various pricing and price structure alternatives and what made sense from the water user perspective. We also had workshops in the City Council, before the City Council in May, October, and November. We brought some proposed possible rates and rate structures to Council for their review last meeting, and we're bringing it to Council again today, hopefully to answer some of the questions that were raised at the last meeting so that we can consider putting the rates into effect in January 1. one of the questions that was raised at the last meeting was, how does the water usage and revenue break out for the various types of customers, both commercial and residential? And you're familiar with how we've been showing residential as three categories, and commercial and industrial. What we did is we lumped the commercial and industrial together and the residential, but then we broke it up by the tiers, because that's been one of the conversations that we've had is, are the tiers that we're using, are they appropriate? And one of the things you can see here is that the residential over on the left, the residential makes up a large part. If you look at the three blue pieces of the pie there that represent the residential, it makes up the majority of the water revenue, with most of it being in Tier 1, the lowest water use, about 28% of it. Some in Tier 2, some in Tier 3. Similarly, you have the greater amount of revenue being generated by Tier 1, the lowest water use in commercial, and falling with Tiers 1 and 2. That's it's consistent with what you see when you look at the actual gallons of water used. Same sort of a pattern. What you will see is that an exaggeration of revenue being made up by the Tier 1 and Tier 2 of both of those customer classes, and that's because they have higher rates in those tiers. So you have most of the water being used by residential, most of the revenue created by residential, and the Tier 1 still a greater amount. Most of the water is in Tier 1, but you see greater amounts of revenue represented because the cost per gallons is greater.
So what do those three add up? Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 percentages add up to be? I can't see the chart.
Oh, sorry. It's about 60% and 40%. 60% residential, 40% commercial.
I knew that was the makeup.
Yeah, those numbers are kind of small.
Oh, okay. Just remember blue ball.
And I know that was one of the questions that you wanted this information so you could see what kind of impact your decision could have on users, both when you look at it as far as volume and the revenue created by the rate structures. So we put that in, and we're going to have side-by-side comparisons of some of the options that are being proposed before council. After last week's council meeting, staff heard two main key policy issues being talked about, and one was the related to low-income assistance, and should the rates be raised some small amount in a way that was meaningful as far as rate relief for those who have difficulties with their utility bills, particularly water and sewer. And the other question that seemed to come to the fore was on the seasonal rate tier changes, and was there a way to take particularly the middle tier and break it into two tiers so that the high usage customers within that tier paid a greater amount than the low user to try to accommodate those middle tier customers. Starting with the first policy question, low-income assistance, we presently have a program in place now to help folks that have difficulty with their utility bills. It's the Help to Others, or H2O program. It's administered by the Center of Hope, and that was beginning back in 2013. It's a program that's in place. I might mention that that there's another similar program administered by the Center of Hope that helps Westar with their energy customers. With the current program, no eligible customers have been turned away, and you can get a sense of the number of participants and the funds associated with the program. One of the reasons why no eligible customers have been turned away is because of the requirements of the program. They're somewhat narrow, and so there are people who come and apply but that are not eligible and therefore do not get this assistance. And what we'd like to do is to look at an alternative, an enhancement to the current H2O program. The differences being that with the current program, it's one-time assistance. So you get one time and then you're not eligible to ever apply again. It limits it to households with 125% of the poverty level. We get about 250 to 300 new participants each year, and we spend about $25,000, $30,000 a year on the program. An enhanced H2O program could take the form of an annual assistance. In other words, not just the one lifetime assistance, but be able to qualify for it each year up to 4 years. And this is somewhat similar to the West Star program on how they have a limit to the number of years that you may apply. We slightly increase the income, the poverty level from 125 to 130%, hopefully catching a few more of those people who some have characterized as the working poor. And what we recognize then is if you have roughly 250 new participants a year, and you're going to be able to allow them to qualify up to 4 years, you need to have the capacity to take somewhere around 1,000 total customers as customers repeat for the 4 years. This program would be about $120,000 to $150,000 a year, which would require about 0.1% of increase on our volumetric charges on the water bill. One of the concerns expressed by council at the last meeting was when we looked at the lifeline rate and a reduction on the base charge was, is this meaningful enough? Is this a meaningful enough change to really provide folks with hope? What some of the feedback that we got from participants and those who administer the H2O program at the Center of Hope is that this really does seem to be a program that does work and does help. It's just too limited. And this helps in that regard, in that it expands it so that more people are able to participate up to 4 years each annually.
Could I interrupt?
Yes.
I apologize. What does that 0.1% increase look like in dollar amounts? Is it a few cents? Is it a couple dollars?
We'll have that example.
Is it?
It's on the next slide.
Hold your horses, Vice Mayor.
I'm glad you asked that, Mr. Vice Mayor.
Nice transition.
It was.
Glad I can help you segue.
Thank you. You're welcome. So when you look at, we isolate just that part of the proposed program and what it would look like as far as impact on bills. You're used to seeing the residential low user, medium user, high user, and then commercial and industrial. And for those categories, as you can see, the low user, it's going to be about a 4-cent per month increase on their bill, 6 cents for middle user, 14 cents on a large user in the for the residential customers, and about a 54-cent for commercial, and $51 on a large industrial 10 million gallon user. So it is a 0.1% increase on the volumetric rate, and to get some sort of an idea about what that looks like on a typical bill, we presented it in the way that we always present to you guys what new rates would look like. So some would argue that it's a fairly small as far as impact on rates, but it would arguably have a greater actual impact, help, if you will, for those who need the service. And we're relying on an actual proven model, the H2O care program. But it's the second policy question that I'd like to address is the seasonal rate tier changes. There are 3 tiers right now, and by way of review, these are based on the average winter consumption that a customer uses during December, January, February, and March, and then how much of that water each month over that amount do they use, and then we charge based on what tier they fall into. Right now you have Tier 1 up to 110% of that average winter consumption. You have 110 to 300, that's the middle tier, if you will, middle users, and then over 310%, that's the heavy users. What we looked at is the possibility of a different rate tiered structure where we take the second tier and divide it into, and divide the cost basically in half. What we found was that about 11% of our customers would be entering into 2A, and only about 5% would enter into 2B, and that has an effect on what the costs that you would see on that kind of program. With the low user, the residential 3,750 gallons, we didn't include that in the example because they fall all within Tier 1, and so there'd be no impact to them. But if you have someone who's the middle user, the 7,500 gallons, you're looking at about a 2-cent per month drop in their monthly bill. Not very much. Whereas with you get the bigger user, the 15,000 gallons, it's about a $1.33 increase in theirs. This was a little bit surprising.
If you split the tiers.
Split the tiers in half, right.
Right.
The numbers, though, seem a little odd, and we were trying to get to the why of it. Why only 2 cents savings on the more conservative users in Tier 2?
Right.
And a bigger impact on those at the higher end. And really what it has to do is, what we were trying to look at, maybe try to help folks do, is to stay down at the lower end and reward them for the lower end of Tier 2, and take some of that incentive and put it on as an increased cost onto Tier 3. Well, what we see right now is that people seem to be doing that pretty much already with the tiered rates that we have and the economic incentives that they represent. People pretty much, a lot of the users are staying down towards the bottom of the Tier 2 use, not using as much as most folks in the tier upper end, and fewer people making it into the higher end of Tier 2. So then we look at the possibility is, well, is this the right way to achieve, helping those that are kind of more moderate users? And we looked at the possibility of, well, what about going outside of Tier 2? If we reduce not just in half, but way reduce the amount in Tier 2, now you're going to be increasing the Tier 2B so much that it almost starts to match the Tier 3. And in order for the conservation signals to remain in place, now you increase even more the Tier 3, which raises the concern that the mayor has expressed that if you get too big of a spread in those tiers and you add an annual percent increase every year, that spread gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It just exacerbates that situation.
Well, and this would be a good chance to go back to slide 3, because I think that will help further that point. And the way I'm reading slide 3, we already give those Tier 1 customers a pretty significant break. So we were talking about maybe bumping them up another 25% in water usage.
Excuse me.
The way I'm reading this comparison, and thank you for it, is that we have 47% of our residential users using water in Tier 1, but they only make up 28% of the revenue. So there's a pretty significant gap right there where they're getting, and so anything that we do to widen that gap, to me, would seem unfair for everyone else. So there's a pretty significant savings right now, and we're providing that for them. And so I agree that the splitting the tiers would not serve what we think would best serve this community's water needs.
And we looked, and thank you, Mayor, we also looked at, well, what about, going towards the Tier 3 side of things? And we have some concerns about that because of the volatility of our water sales from year to year. It is the most volatile in the higher consumption. So if we have a wet year and we have bad water sales in a wet year, that impacts our ability to cover our fixed costs. I mean, we just had a very wet year this year, and the manager asks us to make sure that we have plans in place that if we have multiple low water sales years in a row, what is our contingency plan? The situation becomes even more difficult to plan for if you were to increase reliance on the high water consumption, because you're only going to realize the benefit when people are in the hot summers and using a lot of water. So it seems like there isn't any really good way to affect what we'd like by splitting Tier 2, and it seems like we're kind of already realizing that benefit with how people are automatically using within that Tier 2.
And we're giving them a pretty decent break today.
Yes, sir. So when you look at the two policies that are in question, what we're presenting to council for your consideration are four possible all represent rate increases, 4 possible rate increases. Taking the existing tiered structure and increasing the amount to meet our revenue increase requirements. That does not mean that the low-income assistance is helped. There is no H2O program enhancement in that option, and the rate tiers are not changed. They stay as they are. The existing tier structure plus enhanced H2O, that does help with question number 1, low-income assistance. A new tiered structure where we just talked about splitting Tier 2, and a new tiered structure where we also add on to it the expanded H2O program. And when we look at that, this is what you see as far as the kind of the usual way we present different typical user classes, if you will, the residential low, medium, and high user, the commercial user, and the industrial user. And you can see side by side the current bill, the existing tiers option, the existing tiers plus enhanced H2O option, the new tiers option, and the new tiers plus H2O option, and you can get a sense of what the increase would be over our current bill. And so this gives a side-by-side comparison, and we can bounce back to this here in a moment to look at specific differences. But another way that we looked at it is just representing just the differences on a bar chart. As you can see, the residential 15,000 gallons, that's the one with the new tiers option. That's the yellow one. Seems to be quite a bit higher. In all other cases, they're fairly even as far as what the comparison is. The amount of the enhanced H2O program, as you would expect, is a tenth higher than just one without it, because that's what we're talking about doing, is increasing the bills by 0.1% to cover that new program. So those are the 4 options that are available. We have 4 sets of resolutions prepared in anticipation of council wanting to pick one of the 4. And with that, I stand for any questions.
Questions before we go out for public comment? Yes, Councilman
Quick,
Fry.
just related to the H2O fund as it currently, that's approximately how much annually?
It's about $25,000 to $30,000, roughly $25,000 a year expenditures. The way that that's funded is we put a certain amount into the reserve, and then people round up their bill and in the form of donations. That's only about $4,000 a year. So as you can see, under the current program, expenditures outstrip contributions, and we've been making up the difference in that amount. We had we realized a considerable windfall in terms of our debt collection, and we put that in the amount of $84,000 one-time add to the fund to cover what we anticipated to be the next 3 years of the program. But we're going to have to do something to sustain it if we don't consider one of these options before you today.
But the general public contribution has only been about $4,000 a year.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions from the council at this point? We will go out to the public. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address the council on this agenda item? Seeing none, we will bring the discussion back to the bench. Councilmember Meitzner.
Thank you, Mayor. Mr. Manager, can we go back in history for a minute? So you've been here 6 or 7 years, and I've been here 5 years. And so when I first came on, we were talking about water was a important thing, and you were meeting with stakeholders, major commercial users, and at the time, refresh my memory, the previous rate world was, if it was a good year, there was no rates. If it was a bad year, big rates. It was spiky, and our intent was to calm it out over 10 years. Can you just refresh my memory, please?
Right. Mayor, members of the council, when back in 2009, because of the way that the formula had been developed, and more importantly, the projections that we had for revenues to the utility based on usage and weather patterns, we had what I consider to be maybe fairly aggressive assumptions regarding water use and projections for the future. And so we were very vulnerable when we had wet periods, as we did in 2009 and 10, if I remember correctly. That then forced us into significant rate increases, and we were in the double-digit area. In fact, if I remember correctly, my first year here, I believe we had to ask the council for 2 rate increases in a single year. And then after that, the projections were for continued double-digit unless we were to do something differently. So then we did, we brought in, I believe it was with the first COSA, if I remember correctly, when we started to ratchet down our projections, become what I believe more realistic, and make us less vulnerable as a utility to changes in weather patterns. And we understood the importance of making adjustments early on in reaction to weather changes, so that, again, we would not see rate increases based on conservation. We didn't want to do that. We didn't want to penalize people for conserving. We wanted to actually encourage them, and that was, I think, one of the frustrations of the council and the community at the time. So now, because of the changes in our assumptions, the new model from the first COSA, which has then been verified and tweaked a little bit for the second COSA, we're now in a position where we can say with some certainty that even in wet periods that we can operate the utility while in the projected numbers. If I can add to that just a little bit, I'd like to link, because we've been caught up in the questions about the tiers and about the H2O program, but we've kind of lost sight of the bigger issue, and that's the linkage really between item 2, what you're considering today, right now, and item 1. Item 1 said basically that the legacy we want to leave our children and grandchildren is a community that is well-managed, that has sound infrastructure, that cares about quality of life, that we're making the right decisions going forward. And I think a lot of the time, and Councilmember Fry could talk more about this, but a lot of the time in the committee was talking about the infrastructure need and the significant need that we have. What you're doing with these rate increases is not that you're spending a lot, that you're spending 5% to meet our operating needs. What you're doing is spending 5% to address our capital needs. And that's the part of the model that I'm really proud about, is that we are able to bring our numbers to a much more realistic level, and at the same time start to address the serious infrastructure problems of the utility, to the point that by the end of our planning period, I think we're down to 3% increases and still aggressively dealing with our infrastructure issues. So that's a little more than what you asked.
No, but, well, I know, I appreciate that a lot, because so it's our capital needs and our maintenance that's been not necessarily deferred, but as things aged, they need replaced.
And when we started this process, I think we outlined some of the projects that we were anticipating that we would build next year. And I guess what we'll need to do is make sure we keep that out in front of you as we go through all of these workshops, just to remind the community that what we're doing is the council is trying to address those issues. We don't want another serious main break like we had this past year.
And so we kind of had a 10-year plan, and so we're about in the 4th year of, again, single-digit, mid, 4, 5, 6% area. And then wasn't it going to taper off in like year 6 through 10, or be more static?
Yeah, the sewer's a little slower in getting to our levelized 3. Our goal is to get to a levelized 3% increase out in the end of our planning period. Water does that. I can't remember. Is it 2018, and sewer is a little bit later, more towards the end of the 10-year planning period, but within the planning period that we've been presenting to council, and it hasn't changed very much as far as what we see as anticipated revenue increases. We've been anticipating that we are going to get to that kind of levelized 3% amount out in the part of the planning period.
Okay, well, no, thanks for the rewriting or reviewing that, because that's important. I quote a couple. I think the paper said right this morning when it said, this rate discussion is getting old, but so are our pipes. And so, that was a good, topped off with Garth saying, I'm much too young to feel this dang old, but other than that, it's a good plan.
Bob, what you just shared would be very helpful going forward. We have continued to get that message out there that this isn't about the cost of producing potable water. This is all about the cost of replacing an aging infrastructure. And what would be incredibly helpful if you could capture that throughout the year and show us what improvements are being made that would not have been able to be made. I'm talking about replacing the aging infrastructure without this moving in the direction I think it's going to move today. And then we would still be way behind the curve, and as we continue to try and hand off at some point in time to the next generation. And we are, I think, obliged to make sure that we leave this in better condition than what we have gained it in. So, yes, Brian Fry.
Thank you, and I just want to follow up on what Mr. Layton said. You know, for me, I look at it in my personal life. My home is 15 years old. You know, so every year I have to budget a little bit more on maintaining its infrastructure. Some paint, some landscaping, and sometimes even plumbing hardware. So the city's no different. And, you know, we've got a massive infrastructure challenge. We've identified that in the community investments plan. And right now, we're currently working on that water and sewer utilities task force, the utilization, to help us identify some efficiencies and better operating and maybe make this smaller in future years. But if we don't start addressing it now, and this is a way to do this in small doses and still enjoy extremely low water rates when we compare across the nation. So it's a big challenge, but it's a plan that allows us to do it in a steady way without having to take on big hits. So, but I just want to follow up on what Bob said, so thank you.
Yes, Vice Mayor.
Well, it's very interesting. If you go to the city's water center down in Herman Hill Park, they have some displays down there of current pipes that have been pulled out of the city of Wichita's infrastructure, and to look and see that we still have and have recently had wood supply pipes that are probably original to the house is astonishing to me. And I know that there's a lot of frustration in the community when they have to have their water supply pipes maintained or repaired 2 and 3 and 4 times in 1 year because the infrastructure is so low, and the amount of cost that it takes and it puts on taxpayers, or in this case ratepayers, to continue to have someone come out and fix those issues. There's some frustration when we raise rates, but there's a lot more frustration in the community when we have to go out and continue to fix broken water supply pipes. So I'm supportive of this just so we can have an effective water system and cut down on some of that frustration. So, thank you for all your hard work on this, Alan. Thank you to you and your staff as well.
Any other questions, comments? Yes, Levante Williams.
Thank you, Mayor. I do appreciate all the work that went into this document and into the phases of what we need to go through in order to make sure that our water and sewer is protected for the next 50 to 100 years. And I so appreciate, Mayor, what your comments about leaving things in a better shape than what we found them. So I appreciate all the work that has gone into it. I appreciate you and staff. I know LaShonda last week probably had no lunch. You guys probably didn't even feed her. Told her to go right back to the office and fix the program that is H2O.
She got a water break.
She got a water, okay, I missed that one. They didn't tell me she got a water break.
We'll feed her double today.
But I really appreciate your understanding that let's show it in a different way, that there is a need. all of us sitting at this table, I think all of our voices are the voice of those who feel like they have no voice. And there are many of those out there, and they would not tell you themselves that I have a problem. So I appreciate us building that into this document. Thank you.
Anything else? Alan, thank you, and I appreciate all of the information that you brought us because it was very helpful in helping me make up a decision as we move forward. As I mentioned, it appears that we already give Tier 1 ratepayers a pretty significant break, and so I would argue that we should not change the tier system, and if we are ready, then I would move that we adopt option number 2, which is keeping the same tiered rate structure, enhancing the H2O program that's in play today, which is basically going to cost Tier 1 customers 4 cents a month, 6 cents a month if they jump into my average water bill, and occasionally I'll pay 14 cents a month.
Second.
We have a motion and a second.
Real quick, pardon me, is there any evaluation after a period of time on the H2O fund aspect of this?
Yeah, good question, Mayor. What I committed to is that we would bring something back this time next year. So when you're considering the program for next year, we'll let you know what our progress was this first year.
And thank you, Manager, because we think that this adds so much more value than what we were proposing with the Lifeline, and this truly does help our community move forward. And so we have a motion and a second on the floor. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Preliminary planning estimates for the 2016-2017 Consolidated Plan Third Program Year Action Plan.
Good morning. I'm Lisa Lang, Program Coordinator for the Housing and Community Service Department, for the record. The item we're presenting today represents the first official action in the development of our 2016-17 Consolidated Spending Plan. As you know, the City of Wichita receives an annual allocation of funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development for the purpose of creating strong, inclusive communities and affordable homes for all, which aligns with the city's goal of creating a livable and sustainable community. There are 3 types of funds included in the consolidated plan: community development block grant funds, which can be used for a variety of community development needs. The amount of our 2015 allocation was about $2.6 million. Home investment partnership funds, which are used to promote homeownership and create affordable housing. The amount of our 2015 home allocation was about $1.1 million. And finally, also included are emergency solutions grant funds, which are used to address homelessness in our community, and the amount of that allocation in 2015 was about $238,000. As a reminder, in order to receive these grants, HUD requires that cities develop a 5-year consolidated plan to identify the community needs and spending priorities. Then, each year, the city must develop and submit to HUD a program year action plan which allocates specific funding amounts for planned activities. The City of Wichita's third program year action plan will be due to HUD on May 15, 2016, and that'll allocate funds for the program year beginning July 1st, 2016. As I mentioned, we're in the very early stages of our 2016-17 planning process. You may recall that last month, staff from our department visited each of the district advisory boards to share information concerning our current plan and to solicit feedback regarding future spending priorities. What staff will ask you to do today is establish the preliminary planning estimates for our overall categorical allocations and authorize the release of requests for proposals and funding applications for certain categories of activities. After the first of the year, the Grants Review Committee will review the proposals and make selection funding recommendations. Staff will use the estimates that you approved today to begin drafting a preliminary one-year action plan, which will include those GRC recommendations, and will come back to you in March to present a proposed plan. The preliminary plan that you approve in March will then be widely distributed for a 30-day review and comment period. Staff will incorporate any feedback received into the document and bring you back a third program year action plan for your approval in May. Again, that'll be due to HUD by May 15th, and funded activities can begin the following July 1. There are three types of funds included in the consolidated plan. Community development block grants, which can be used for a wide range of community development needs, home investment, and emergency solutions grant, as I mentioned. Sorry. I think I got a little off here.
That works because we're a little bit off every day.
I beg your pardon. Technology. Okay. Sorry about that. The first source I mentioned is the Community Development Block Grant. These funds can be used for a variety of eligible activities, but it is required that at least 70% of the total activity expenditures benefit low and moderate income residents of Wichita. Today, staff recommends anticipating $2,759,325 of CDBG funding for the development of the 2016 spending plan. This amount assumes the annual allocation from HUD will remain the same as 2015 and adds $126,455 from unallocated funds. This amount will allow for current year CDBG activities to continue in the 2016-17 plan at 2015 funding levels. To break this amount down, staff recommends an estimate of $1,179,251 for housing activities and code enforcement. HUD allows a maximum of 20% of the annual CDBG allocation to be used for planning, administration, and compliance activities which are required. Based on the numbers we're presenting today, that would be an amount of $526,574. Staff recommends an estimate of $1,053,500 for public service activities. This is the same as the 2015 amount, which funds the activities that you see on this slide. Two of the activity categories shown are actually implemented by other service providers in our community, and those selection and funding recommendations are made by the GRC, as I mentioned. As part of today's action, we'll ask for your approval to release the request for proposals for women's services, which funds shelter services for victims of domestic violence, and youth crime prevention and enrichment funds, which fund crime prevention activities for middle school youth. As you know, there has been a great deal of community interest in the CDBG funding that we make available for youth programming. Staff would like to engage our community partners and potential partners in a strategic review of our youth services programs and activities and take a look at what outcomes we're expecting for that investment. At this time, staff recommends that the council approve a preliminary planning estimate of $125,000 for youth crime prevention and an estimated $225,000 for summer youth employment, which again is the same as the 2015 allocation. With that action, staff will release the RFP for crime prevention activities and begin the community dialogue on all of our youth services funding and strategies. So that's our CDBG recommendation. Moving on to home funds, staff recommends using a planning estimate of $1,107,844, which is the amount of our 2015 award, You can see on the slide what activities are funded with those dollars. And finally, we'll look at our Emergency Solutions Grant funds. The current year allocation is $238,807, and we propose using that amount for our initial 2016 planning. As we noted in your agenda report, the regulations do require that the Wichita-Sedgwick County Continuum of Care have input into planning and funding recommendations for ESG dollars, and the amounts shown on the slide were developed in consultation with the COC. With that, staff recommendation is that council approve the preliminary planning estimates for the 2016-17 third program year action plan and authorize the release of requests for proposals and funding applications. And I'll be happy to stay for questions.
Questions before we go out to the public? You explained it so well. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address the council on this agenda item? We invite you to come up to the podium. Seeing none, we will bring the discussion back to the bench. Is there any further discussion? Councilmember Williams?
Thank you, Mayor. I did have a question on slide 8. We talked about 126,455 in prior unallocated funds. Are those funds that we had left over? Are those the funds that we worked on a couple of weeks ago?
The 126,455 are unallocated funds that are currently in our credit line. As a side note, we have received to date $129,074 in program income receipts for this current year. But as you will recall, when we met back in October, the substantial amendment that you approved, we had about $1 million remaining in our credit line unallocated. And so this 126,455 that we're suggesting would reflect the use of some of those funds.
Any other questions? Yes, Councilmember
This
Miller.
isn't a question, it's more of a comment. It's kind of down in the weeds, but it bothers me every time I see it. I don't know why we call that category women's services, that we call women's services. Is there a HUD reason we use that terminology? Otherwise, I guess I'm wondering why we don't call it what it is, which is domestic violence services or something
As far as I know, we could call it anything we like. The activities that are funded are shelter services for victims fleeing domestic violence. So certainly we could rename that.
Well, if it doesn't give anybody else heartburn, I think it would be a more apt term for those services and be less confusing. I've had some people ask me what women's services mean, because in other circles it means other things, and so I would
Easily
make that
done.
suggestion.
Very good.
I'm agreeable to that.
I guess I agree with that, as long as that's what we're using it for. If we begin to expand in women's services, then I can understand.
I'm good.
I don't know that we need that part of our motion.
No, I
though.
don't think so. Just a comment.
All right.
I had to say something this morning. I was running out of
That's okay.
time.
You're doing well this morning. If there's no other questions or comments, then I would move that we approve the preliminary planning estimates for the 2016-2017 third program year action plan and authorize the release of requests for proposals and funding applications.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item.
2016 Grants Review Committee appointments.
Good morning, Mayor and members of the City Council. My name is Kimberly Harris, and I'm with the City Manager's Office. The item before you today is the appointment of members to the City's Grants Review Committee. The Grants Review Committee is a part of the City's Citizen Participation Plan that was approved by the City Council in 2000. This citizen participation plan is also incorporated in the city's consolidated spending plan process as required by HUD. The GRC plays an important role in the consolidated spending plan process. Earlier, the City Council approved the release of RFPs and funding applications for certain activities funded by CDBG, Home, and ESG. The GRC will review responses to these requests and make selection and funding recommendations for the City Council. As specified in the City's Citizen Participation Plan, the GRC includes 14 members nominated from a variety of groups and organizations as shown here and in your agenda report. Staff recommends that the City Council approve these GRC appointments and authorize the City Manager to appoint replacements in the event of appointees are unable to serve. And I stand for any questions.
Any questions? Pretty self-explanatory. Yep. Anyone in the public wish to address the council on this agenda item? Seeing none, we'll bring the discussion back to the bench. Any discussion? I would move that we approve the appointments as recommended.
Second.
A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye. Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Year-end salary and classification ordinances.
Good morning, Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Chris Bezrucki, the HR Director. What we have before you today is your consideration and approval of the salary ordinances for 2016. Those are reflected in the budget that you approved earlier in the year, and we're also looking for your approval of the position classification ordinance as well. Pay increases that we're asking for that have been approved in the budget so far are 1.25% for the transit Teamsters, the airport Teamsters, the FOP, and the International Association of Firefighters. And we're also looking for a general pay increase for all other non-unionized employees. And with that, I'll answer any questions you may have.
My new favorite. Any questions? We will go out to the public. Is there anyone in the public that would like to address the council on this agenda item?
My name is Sybil Strom. I reside at 326 North Walnut Street. Why is it people want pay increases all the time? I believe that you should earn it.
Sybil, our employees do earn it. These are for the employees.
Oh, well, I just think you still should earn it.
Thank you. Anyone else? We'll bring the discussion back to the bench. Any questions on this? Seeing no questions, I move that we adopt the ordinances in place on first reading.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Thank you. Madam Clerk, next item, please.
Approval of travel for Mayor Jeff Longwell to attend the League of Kansas Municipalities Governing Body meeting December 10th and 11th, 2015 in Topeka, Kansas.
Just so that you understand what this is for, I'm on the executive committee of the League of Kansas, and this is our wrap-up of the year meeting, our final quarter of the year. So right in the middle of all of these holiday parties, I'm running up to Topeka to do the people's work up there.
Well, Mayor, since you're doing that, I move that we approve the travel expenses.
Thank you. Second. A motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Madam Clerk, next item.
Board appointments.
Any board appointments or comments? Yes. Councilmember Meissner.
Yeah, Mayor, I'd like to appoint, I'm going to replace on the Historical Preservation Board, Rachel Pokila, she's term limited out. Eric Egan, right. Eakins, sorry. So I didn't have it written down. Replaced with Eric Eakins, a nominate. And on the Police and Fire Retirement Board, I want to reappoint Kenneth Kriz, K-R-I-Z, to another term. And when it's appropriate, I'd like to make a comment or have you make a comment about the recent spirit with the water.
Absolutely. Any other appointments? Yes.
Yes, I'd like to appoint Andre Lamont Anderson to the Library Board. I'd like to appoint Larry Burks to the Public Building Commission, and reappoint James Thompson to the CSBG Review Committee.
Okay. Any other appointments? Let's clear the appointments off, then I move that we approve the appointments as mentioned.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. Pete, thanks for reminding me. There's a couple of things that I want to cover too, and certainly if you want to lead off with that, and I'll add to it.
Well, I just experienced it's been a long negotiation with Spirit, the largest employer in the state of Kansas, and probably one of the largest users of water in the state of Kansas. It's our largest user in Wichita area for our water system anyway. The announcement that they are going to team and help finance the capital portion of reusing water down at the south end of town that we used to we recycle and clean and move it on, and now we're going to be able to capture that and send it a couple of miles on a pipe over to Spirit, and it's 1 million gallons a day, and that's just a large deal. Spirit's very happy. It shows a commitment to the city for longevity and a long term. They've got a nice cycle of orders for the next 10, 15 years, and we need to continue to do whatever we can to support Spirit's campus to assure that all their new work that they're going to have is going to stay here instead of in other cities that they have a choice. On a different note, I'd like to compliment John D'Angelo and our Century 2 staff. I think over Thanksgiving weekend we had the Book of Mormons in town, sold out 5 days in a row over Thanksgiving, and I think I got a report that 35+% of those tickets sold from outside Sedgwick County, and then we all know the Garth Brooks impact of, again, 5 days of tremendous sellout, and I think the early numbers are over 50% of those tickets sold outside of out of this area. So we continue to be a regional draw. We're a decision for the people make to come and spend money, and I congratulate AJ and his group at Interest Arena and as well as John and the Century 2 group. So thank you.
Very well said. Any other comments? I'll also share with that. Spirit made several comments along the lines of their long-term commitment to Wichita, and that's what we understand and appreciate more than anything, that this is certainly going to help them in their quest to be more financially viable in that aviation sector, but it is a big commitment to Wichita and everything that they do here. It's good for us. We get to find a new water source, basically. And as mentioned, when we were looking at our water needs for the next 60 years, if we just simply come up with 10 million gallons a day, we can cure all of our water issues for the next 50 years plus. That keeps us even out of the drought scenario situation. And what Spirit did got us to potentially 15% of that. They said that they're going to commit to 10% of that, but they may get to 15% of that. So we've just made up a big chunk of what we need to do in this community to protect everyone for the next 50 years. And thank you, Spirit, for doing that. And do want to recognize, and I saw the numbers, it was 60% of 77,000 tickets were outside of a 100-mile radius. You heard all of the media reports of our folks in the various different capacities, retail capacities that have enjoyed that influx of customers. We just helped the state out tremendously with the increase in sales tax activities that went on in our area, and everyone did a fantastic job, all the way from the Thursday night events that had the mayor's tree lighting, a livestock convention, a red dress run, and Garth Brooks all downtown Wichita at the same time. And I didn't have any complaints, and I think that it was very well done. So thank you to all of those staff folks that made that possible, and it was very enjoyable. If there is nothing else, we do not, yes, Vice Mayor,
I
go
apologize,
ahead.
since we're
No.
spreading the love with Spirit. There is something else that we talk about, Spirit giving back to the community. They are paying for and sponsoring a very big Christmas concert tonight called the Spirit of Christmas. It's free to every single person that wants to come through the doors. If you don't already have your ticket, you can still get in, just come. And they pay to do that every year for the community. It's a choral concert, it's a symphony concert, and it's huge. And so just another thing that Spirit does, and so everybody should come tonight.
Where?
Century 2. Sorry, Century 2, 7:30 it starts.
Very good. That's worth mentioning.
All right.
Well, before we can adjourn the meeting, we do have a 10-minute executive session, and we will recess into here in just a moment, and we will recess into the conference room on the 10th floor over there in the planning department, and then re-adjourn back here. So I would move that the city council recess into executive session to consider consultation with legal counsel on matters privileged in the attorney-client relationship relating to pending litigation and legal advice, and that the council return from executive session no earlier than 10:25. That works. And we will reconvene here in this room.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify with aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes 7-0. We will go over into the conference room.